The galaxy is fractured, and you stand at the precipice, staring into the abyss of history. The echo of 1,000 years of conflict pulses in the air, a cacophony of voices, both heroic and tragic. You are a witness to the fall of an empire, the rise of tyranny, and the twisted path of a fallen hero. You look upon the wreckage, the ashes of a once vibrant republic, now reduced to nothing more than a shadow of its former self. And there, at the heart of this catastrophe, stands Darth Vader, his presence both terrifying and deeply tragic. But you can't help but wonder, how did we get here? You've been told time and time again that the Republic was a symbol of hope, a beacon of peace. That the Jedi Order were the noble defenders of that peace, the guardians of balance. And yet, in the wake of its destruction, you realize something that shakes you to your core. The very system that birthed Darth Vader was the Republic itself. What if the Republic, in its very essence, created the conditions for the rise of the Sith? What if the Jedi, supposed paragons of virtue, were complicit in the creation of the monster that would one day consume the galaxy? These questions haunt you. The more you dig into the depths of Star Wars lore, the more unsettling the answers become. You're faced with a paradox that disrupts everything you thought you knew. The Jedi, as peacekeepers, seem noble, but their methods are flawed. The Republic, as a beacon of justice, feels righteous, but its failure to maintain peace exposes its hypocrisy. And at the center of it all is Darth Vader, a victim of this flawed system, manipulated and broken by it. There's a cold, hard truth that begins to settle in your mind. Anakin Skywalker didn't just fall to the dark side, he was pushed. The Republic's institutions, the Jedi Order's blind dogma, and the very system they protected all conspired to shape him into what he would become. The idea that the Republic was a force for good, untouchable in its purity, begins to crumble before your eyes. Instead, you see it for what it truly was, a fragile construct built on contradictions and denial, incapable of saving itself or its people from its own decay. And so, you stand at the crossroads of history, unsure of where to turn. Was Darth Vader merely a tragedy of fate, or was he a direct consequence of a system that never truly understood the human condition? Was the Republic's ideal of peace ever possible, or was it doomed from the start? The questions pile on top of each other, demanding resolution. But perhaps the answer is far more uncomfortable than you could have ever imagined. As you delve deeper into the story of Anakin Skywalker, you begin to see the cracks in the Republic's foundation. You can no longer see the Jedi as the ultimate force for good, nor the Republic as the pure embodiment of justice. Instead, you see a system built on denial, repression, and control, a system that created Darth Vader long before he ever donned the black armor. And in the shadows of this tragic tale, you begin to ask, what if the Republic itself was the greatest threat to the galaxy's peace all along? And with that question, you are left with a choice: to ignore the darkness that lurks beneath the surface, or to confront it and seek the truth of what really happened. The answer may change everything. To understand how the Republic created Darth Vader, you must first examine the very foundation of the Republic and the Jedi Order, two institutions that were, on the surface, bastions of justice, virtue, and peace, but beneath that surface, something darker brewed. The Republic's failure was not an external force but a consequence of its own contradictions. These contradictions were deeply psychological and philosophical, as old as the human condition itself. You see, the Republic was a system built on ideals, but it failed to reckon with the complexities of human nature. It assumed that peace could be legislated, that virtue could be imposed, and that the galaxy could be governed by laws that were infallible. But peace is never simply the absence of conflict. It is the understanding and integration of the conflicts within. And the Jedi, as the keepers of this peace, were blinded by their own inability to reconcile light and shadow, both within themselves and in the galaxy. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, would have said that they were a perfect example of the one-sidedness he warned about, their refusal to acknowledge their own shadow. The Jedi were not as pure as they seemed. Their belief that one must reject all attachment, all passion, and all emotional depth was a fundamental denial of the human experience. They believed that the way to peace was through repression, through the control of the mind and emotions. But this is where the first psychological flaw lies. Repression does not lead to peace, it leads to imbalance. When the human psyche is forced to suppress natural instincts and emotions, those feelings do not disappear. They fester, They become the hidden, unconscious forces that shape decisions and actions in ways that cannot be controlled. The story of Anakin Skywalker is the perfect example of this. From the moment he was taken as a child by the Jedi, Anakin was denied something essential to his humanity: attachment, his connection to his mother, his emotions, his very essence as an individual. These were seen as weaknesses, things to be cast aside for the greater good of peace and balance. The Jedi Order's cold detachment, their insistence on avoiding personal connections, was a rejection of the very nature of love and the complexity of human relationships. The darker side of this was that they made Anakin feel that he was incomplete, that love and attachment were things to be avoided, and that to feel deeply was dangerous. The irony: these very emotions would become his greatest power and his eventual downfall. Jung's concept of the shadow is crucial here. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves we reject, the desires, the impulses, the flaws we don't want to acknowledge. The Jedi were so focused on eliminating their shadow, on suppressing their attachments, their fears, their anger, that they failed to see how essential these parts of themselves were. The more they suppressed them, the more they built up, until they became a destructive force. Anakin, in many ways, was the shadow of the Jedi Order. He was a reflection of everything they tried to deny, and everything they would ultimately fail to control. And here you must also consider the philosophical insights of Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche believed that the struggle for power, the will to power, was a fundamental aspect of human existence. This drive, he argued, could lead to great heights of creativity and achievement, but also to destruction. The Jedi, in their idealism, believed that the suppression of the will to power was the path to peace, but by denying their own instincts and desires, they unwittingly paved the way for the rise of the Sith, whose embrace of the will to power was both destructive and seductive. Anakin, whose power was unrivaled, was torn between these two poles: his desire for attachment and love on one side, and the Jedi's cold detachment on the other. This tension, this imbalance, created the fertile ground for the darkness to grow. What is even more tragic is how the Jedi and the Republic failed to recognize the damage they were causing. Their approach to peace was authoritarian. They wielded their power with a sense of righteous certainty, believing that their path was the only true path. But their inability to deal with their own internal contradictions made them blind to the suffering they caused in others. The Republic's corrupt bureaucracy and rigid political structure left no room for nuance or compassion. It was a system built to maintain order at all costs. But that order was hollow. It didn't recognize the soul of the galaxy. It saw only the law. When you look at Anakin's story, it is clear. The Republic's ideal of peace was never more than an illusion. Its refusal to confront its own dark side, the shadows lurking in its laws, its political structures, and its idealized visions of what peace should look like, was the very thing that led to its collapse. The Jedi's rejection of attachment was their greatest weakness. They failed to recognize that love, passion, and attachment are not weaknesses. They are the very forces that give life meaning. In the end, it was not just the Sith who corrupted Anakin. It was the Republic itself, its flawed, rigid structures, its denial of emotional truth, and its inability to adapt to the complexities of the human soul. The Republic created Darth Vader by perpetuating a system that could never truly embrace the messy, beautiful, terrifying nature of humanity, and in doing so, it sealed its own fate. When you step back and look at the consequences of the Republic's blind idealism, you begin to see how these hidden flaws ripple through time, quietly shaping the galaxy in ways no one could foresee. It wasn't just Anakin Skywalker who bore the brunt of these unacknowledged contradictions. The entire galaxy was affected. The Republic's failure to reckon with its own shadow didn't just create Darth Vader, it led to the decay of an entire system, one that was built on repression, illusion, and the refusal to confront the darkness within. You've likely heard the phrase, history repeats itself, but in the case of the Republic, it's more than just a repetitive cycle. It's a quiet, insidious erosion of values and integrity. The way the Jedi and the Republic handled their internal contradictions, by hiding them, denying them, and pretending they didn't exist, allowed these contradictions to silently infect the very structures they were trying to preserve. In this sense, the Republic's collapse was not an anomaly, but the inevitable result of a system that was fundamentally out of balance. One of the most profound psychological consequences of this denial is something that, ironically, seems to have affected the Jedi more than anyone: the fragmentation of the self. Carl Jung argued that for a person or society to achieve true individuation, true wholeness, they must confront and integrate their shadow, those hidden parts of themselves they fear or reject. But when these aspects are ignored or repressed, the psyche splits into competing forces. The result is fragmentation, inner conflict, and a constant battle between opposing desires and impulses. This fragmentation is exactly what you see in Anakin Skywalker. His intense emotional attachments, his love for Padme, his fear of losing those he loved, are cast aside by the Jedi in the name of peace and control. In doing so, the Jedi create a fractured psyche within him, one that cannot reconcile his deep human emotions with their cold, calculated philosophy. His love, his attachment, and his rage are all deemed wrong, and the very things that could have led to his healing and integration are rejected as dangerous. It's no wonder he falls. The very system that was supposed to guide him toward balance only pushed him further into the dark. But it wasn't just Anakin's individual psyche that became fragmented. The Republic itself was suffering from the same disease. It had become a broken system, a web of bureaucratic dysfunction and corruption. The Empire's rise was not an unexpected event. It was the natural consequence of the Republic's inability to reconcile its ideals with reality. By placing its hopes in an illusion of peace, it ignored the real, messy, and unpredictable nature of the galaxy and its inhabitants. It believed it could control everything through law and order, but the soul of the galaxy, the needs, desires, and pain of its people, was neglected. The Jedi's failure to accept this was a critical turning point. The more they fought to maintain their ideals of a peace that could only exist in theory, the more they became blind to the realities of the world around them. This created an emotional and spiritual vacuum, one that was easily filled by the forces of darkness, as embodied by Palpatine. Palpatine was the ultimate manipulator, capitalizing on the weaknesses of the Republic, exploiting the tension between idealism and the harsh realities of the galaxy. He gave the people of the galaxy an answer to their suffering, an answer that was seductive and simple: order through power. But power unchecked is a dangerous thing. As Friedrich Nietzsche famously wrote, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster." The Republic, in its desperation to maintain control, created a monster in its pursuit of peace. Palpatine, in his twisted genius, offered the very solution to the Republic's flaws, but his solution only perpetuated the cycle of corruption, fear, and eventual collapse. The Jedi, too, were caught in this cycle. They believed that to bring peace, they had to keep their emotions in check, to deny the very thing that could have saved them. In the end, their refusal to acknowledge their inner darkness and the complexities of human nature led to their downfall. And then there's the emotional and societal trauma left in the wake of this tragic cycle. Every action, every policy, every emotional suppression left a scar. When Anakin fell to the dark side, it wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a reflection of the larger, systemic failure of the Republic. The pain and trauma of individuals like Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan resonated throughout the galaxy, and these wounds didn't heal, they festered. You can see this trauma in the way people in the galaxy view power and authority. The rise of the rebellion, the formation of the Empire, and the eventual fall of the Sith Empire, all of these are deeply entangled in the trauma of the Republic's failure. Societies that are built on a foundation of repression, illusion, and denial create individuals who feel lost, unmoored, and disconnected. They are ripe for manipulation, ripe for the promises of those who claim they can restore order at any cost. But there is something even deeper here, something more insidious: the psychological consequences of power itself. The Republic's obsession with control, order, and peace led it to take on a tyrannical nature, one that became just as dangerous as the Sith Empire. The Jedi may have prided themselves on their commitment to peace, but their methods were no different from those they claimed to oppose. They sought control over the galaxy's emotional and spiritual life, enforcing a version of peace that was rooted in suppression. The consequences of this kind of power are always the same. They breed resentment, rebellion, and eventually, revolution. The tragedy of the Republic, and of Anakin Skywalker, is that they both failed to understand the complexity of the human condition. The Republic's failure to reckon with its own contradictions, its insistence on maintaining an illusion of peace, and its denial of the emotional and spiritual needs of its citizens created the very conditions for Darth Vader's rise. The Jedi failed to see that peace cannot be imposed, it must be nurtured from within. Only by acknowledging the darkness in themselves and the galaxy could they have truly found balance. But they didn't, and the consequences were catastrophic. You feel it, don't you? That quiet stirring deep inside, the feeling that something isn't right, that the systems you've trusted are rotting from within. The Jedi failed you. The Republic betrayed you. But the rebellion you need isn't out there in the stars. It begins within. Imagine this. The rebellion isn't fought with blasters or starships, but in the silence between your thoughts, where fear, pain, and unspoken truths dwell. The true battle is internal. The chains that bound Anakin were forged in his mind long before Palpatine ever offered him freedom. And if you're to escape the fate he could not, you must be willing to rebel against everything you were taught to believe was good. Anakin's tragedy was not just that he turned into Darth Vader, but that he thought it was the only path left. He was never shown another way, because the Jedi silenced any voice that dared to challenge their creed. But what if there had been another voice? One that told him his grief wasn't a weakness, that his love wasn't a flaw, that his longing for control wasn't evil, but an invitation to explore the places within him he feared the most. Carl Jung would call this the process of individuation. To truly become whole, one must descend into the unconscious, confront their shadow, and reclaim the disowned parts of themselves. Not to be consumed by them, but to integrate them. And this is where your rebellion begins. You've been taught to suppress, to obey, to conform, perhaps by your culture, your religion, your education, or your family. So was Anakin. He was taught that emotion was dangerous, that detachment was divine. But true freedom comes not from cutting yourself off from feeling. It comes from diving into the depths of your emotional reality and emerging with something real, something yours. This is what Luke Skywalker began to understand. When he threw away his lightsaber in the Emperor's throne room, he wasn't just rejecting violence. He was rejecting the lie. He refused to become what the Jedi or the Sith wanted him to be. He chose his own path. That was the real rebellion, a refusal to become a weapon for someone else's ideology. You must do the same. And it's terrifying, because to choose this path means stepping into the unknown. It means questioning the teachings that once gave you comfort. It means acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, the Jedi weren't the heroes, and the Republic wasn't the light. That peace without truth is oppression in disguise. In a world where people are trained to seek certainty, the rebel walks willingly into uncertainty. That's what made figures like Yoda so tragically flawed. For all his wisdom, he could not see beyond the dogma. He couldn't imagine that the Force might be calling the Jedi themselves to change. But others did. Qui-Gon Jinn heard that call. He trusted the living Force, not the rigid codes. He defied the Council, followed his intuition, and believed in the child Anakin when others only saw danger. He was the first whisper of a new way. A Jedi not of control but of surrender, not of suppression but of truth. Had he lived, perhaps Anakin's story would have ended differently. You may never face a Sith Lord or hold a lightsaber, but your rebellion is no less real. You are surrounded by systems that demand your obedience, your silence, your compromise. They tell you who to be, how to think, what to feel. But inside you is the same spark that ignited the rebellion. And it begins with a question. What if the voice inside you is right and the world is wrong? Jean-Paul Sartre believed that freedom was both a gift and a burden. You are condemned to be free, he said, meaning that you are responsible for defining your own existence. No one else can do it for you, not your teachers, not your government, not even the Jedi. And that freedom, it is terrifying, but it's also the only way to truly live. Gabor Maté reminds us that most addiction is not about pleasure, it's about pain. Anakin wasn't addicted to power. He was addicted to control because he was terrified of powerlessness. But had someone helped him explore that pain, not erase it, not judge it, but understand it, he might have found peace without turning to the dark side. That is your rebellion. To face the pain rather than flee from it. To meet the parts of yourself you've denied. To look into the abyss and say, I see you, you are part of me. That's where healing begins. That's where the old systems start to crumble, not because you attacked them, but because you no longer need them. Because you found your own truth. The rebellion was never just a war against an empire. It was a revolt against a way of thinking. A refusal to believe that peace can only be bought with obedience. That light means denying darkness. That love is weakness. True rebels, like Luke, Leia, and even Ahsoka, didn't just reject the Empire. They rejected the narratives that made the Empire possible. And now so can you. Let your rebellion begin. If you found this thought-provoking, or if you want to explore more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep questioning the world around you.